The United States Congress has formally written to the Canadian government warning that a Canadian surveillance bill would harm American national security. That is not a think tank. That is not a blogger. That is the chairs of the U.S. House Judiciary Committee and the House Foreign Affairs Committee putting their names on a letter to Ottawa, on the record, in writing. Their concern was straightforward. Canada's Bill C-22, the Lawful Access Act, would require every tech company operating in Canada to build a permanent backdoor into their systems. The U.S. lawmakers said that would force American companies to choose between compromising the security of every single user they have, including American citizens, or leaving the Canadian market entirely. So here is the question that everything in this video will work toward answering. If the United States government believes this bill harms their own national security, why is the Canadian government still moving it forward? Let us go through what Bill C-22 actually requires. Under the bill, every telecom company, messaging app, cloud service, and social media platform operating in Canada would be required to install surveillance capabilities that give police and CSIS access to user data, provided they have a warrant. But it goes further than that. Every one of these providers would also be required to retain the metadata of every Canadian user for a full year. Metadata is not nothing. Metadata tells you which device connected to which cell tower. It tells you where someone was when they were there and who they communicated with. University of Ottawa internet law expert Michael Geist described it plainly. What Bill C-22 creates is a comprehensive surveillance map of virtually every Canadian. Meanwhile, in the United Kingdom, the government demanded Apple build exactly this kind of backdoor. Apple chose to remove its strongest data protection tool from every UK user rather than comply. That is not a hypothetical. That already happened. Apple has now told the Canadian government the same thing is possible here. If C-22 passes as written, Apple has indicated it may withdraw privacy services from Canada altogether. By the way, there is also a blanket secrecy provision buried in the bill. Companies that receive a ministerial order to modify their systems would be legally barred from telling anyone they received that order. Think about what that means. A company could be ordered to build surveillance infrastructure into their product, and they could not legally disclose that to their users. Worth noting, France and Sweden both stepped back from similar surveillance proposals after studying the risks. Canada is pressing forward. By comparison, the U.S. law covering this area, the Communications Assistance for Law Enforcement Act, does not include messaging apps, cloud services, or metadata retention. Canada's proposed bill goes significantly further than American law on American soil. These are not my opinions. This is what the public record shows. Now let us look at the record on how this government handles promises about digital regulation, because Bill C-22 does not exist in isolation. The record shows that when Bill C-11, the Online Streaming Act, was introduced, the government repeatedly and publicly promised it would never be used to regulate content uploaded by ordinary Canadians. The cost to Canadians, that promise was later contradicted by the government's own lawyers in a federal court filing. Ministry of Justice lawyers argued in writing that the act does, in fact, allow for regulation of user-uploaded content on social media platforms. That is the government's own legal team saying the opposite of what ministers told the public. The record shows that government ministers told Senate committees with confidence that tech companies warning about the Online News Act, Bill C-18, were bluffing. The prediction was that when legislated to pay for linking to news, those companies would come to the table. The cost to Canadians, Meta, did not come to the table. Meta stripped news links from Facebook and Instagram in Canada. That decision holds to this day. Millions of Canadians lost access to Canadian news through those platforms, and the government's prediction was simply wrong. The record shows that with Bill C-22, the same government is now telling the public that Apple, Meta, Signal, and the U.S. Congress are all misreading the bill. The public safety minister has said the concerns reflect, and I quote, a misunderstanding. The cost to Canadians, if those companies are not bluffing, and history suggests they are not, Canadians could lose access to some of the most widely used encryption-protected services in the world. Wrong, not according to me. According to the pattern that the public record documents. What the government said in response to U.S. congressional warnings, Apple's statement, and Meta's testimony Tech giants are misinterpreting some of the safeguards that are already built in. What that means in plain English, as I read it: the companies who build and maintain the world's most sophisticated encryption systems, the legal chairs of 2 U.S. congressional committees, and multiple cybersecurity experts have all looked at the same legislation and arrived at the same conclusion, and they are all simply confused. Every single one of them, just confused. I offer that as observation, not verdict. Let us move to the numbers. Canada is the only G7 country that is a net exporter of emissions, meaning more greenhouse gas is embedded in what we export than in what we consume domestically. Canada is also the only major oil-producing and exporting nation that applies an industrial carbon tax to its producers who compete in global markets. Oil and gas investment in Alberta has collapsed 61% since 2014, from $64.7 billion to $25.4 billion in 2024. While the policy framework became progressively more complex, analysis of the industrial carbon tax trajectory projects a loss of more than 50,000 jobs nationally and a 1.3% shrinkage of the national economy. The West Coast Pipeline Agreement, announced this week, sets a pipeline construction start date of as early as September 2027. But there is still no private sector company that has formally stepped forward to build it. The Pathways Carbon Capture Project, which the federal government has made a condition of the pipeline, has been in discussion for 5 years without shovels in the ground. The Oil Sands Alliance itself says an industrial carbon tax without global application is solely a cost of doing business, with no incentive mechanism. That is not a statistic. That is a Tuesday for a worker in Fort McMurray doing the math on whether their job is still there in 5 years. That is a small business owner in Calgary building a budget around a policy framework that shifts every time there is an election. That is a pension calculation somewhere that depends on the energy sector remaining viable enough to hire people. Every other country lives on the same planet. So why is Canada the only one carrying these particular costs alone? Now, some in the media will tell you that Canadians who raise these questions are being alarmist, too negative, too focused on problems instead of solutions. Insert whatever word they are using this week. But Canadians who have been paying attention already know what the record shows. You watched Bill C-11 pass with promises about user content protection, and then watched government lawyers argue in court that user content can be regulated. You watched the Online News Act produce exactly the outcome the government said would never happen. You are not wrong for noticing the pattern. You are not extreme for asking whether it will happen again. You have simply been paying attention. Every source used in this video is verified and linked in the pinned comment below. Check them yourself. That is exactly what you should do. Do not take my word for it. Pull the congressional letter, read the court filings, look at the investment numbers from Alberta. The information is all publicly available. Tell me in the comments, when did you first realize something was off? Was it the moment a government minister dismissed a concern that turned out to be accurate? Was it the investment numbers? Was it an explanation that just never quite added up? I want to hear from you. There is a version of this country where the government's energy policy and the country's actual energy workers are pointed in the same direction, where a pipeline discussion ends with shovels in the ground, not with another framework, another condition, another project that is perpetually 18 months away, where the rules around what Canadians can say, read, and communicate online are written to protect Canadians, not to protect a government from the Canadians it is supposed to serve, where the gap between what a policy is described as and what it actually does is small enough that ordinary citizens can trust the description. That version of Canada is not revolutionary. It is not partisan. It is just a country where the language used in public matches the intention behind the policy and where the results match both. Right now, there is a gap. The government is talking about reordering the global energy architecture and building net zero financial markets. Canadians are watching investment leave, asking whether their privacy still exists, and trying to figure out whether a pipeline that has been promised for a generation will ever actually be built. There is a gap between those two conversations, and Canadians feel it every single day, not as an abstraction, but as a cost on an invoice, a job posting that disappeared, a piece of software that might stop working because Ottawa and Silicon Valley cannot agree on what a backdoor is. J.D. Vance used the phrase civilizational suicide when describing what he sees happening in Europe. Governments unable or unwilling to close the distance between what they say they stand for and what their own citizens are actually experiencing. Whether you agree with his framing or not, the underlying question is one Canadians are also asking in quieter language: is the government building a country for us or building something else and asking us to pay for it? That question does not require anger to ask. It requires attention. And Canadians are paying attention. The data shows exactly where things stand. Canada has every resource, every geographic advantage, every reason to be building something durable right now. The gap is not a resource gap. It is not a talent gap. The gap is between the Canada being described and the Canada being lived in. That gap can close. It has closed before. It will close again when the priorities of those in office and the priorities of the people paying for office find each other. Canada is not out of options. It is out of patience for the distance between the two.